Hello, I'm Josh Surratt, lead pastor of Seacoast Church, and I'm here in Mother Emanuel AME Church with Senator Tim Scott and Congressman Trey Gowdy to discuss the power of unlikely friendships and the importance of reconciliation for our churches, our communities, and our nation. Trey and Tim have partnered together to encourage reconciliation in our communities through a small group series. They believe that this happens one friendship at a time. That's what happened in their own lives. A real and unlikely friendship developed between the two of them. Trey Gowdy is a lawyer from the upstate of South Carolina, whereas Tim Scott comes from Charleston in the Lowcountry. And their paths crossed in Washington when they entered Congress. But nobody could have predicted that they would become genuine friends. So Trey, talk about your friendship. How did it begin?
Well, I think everyone knew who Tim Scott was before orientation in Congress. He incredibly popular, well known throughout the state, but I'd never met him until we were both elected in the class of 2010. 80 some odd freshman members of Congress, and far and away the most well known of all of the 80 was Tim Scott from South Carolina. So I watched him, I admired him from afar. I think from my perspective, our friendship began when I noticed even this person who perceives to have everything. He's the most popular member of our class. Leadership loves him, the television loves him. And yet there was a vulnerability when we met for a meal one night that he seemed, I don't want to say overwhelmed, but overwhelmed by all of the pressure of what I just described. Whenever someone exposes their vulnerability or asks for help, it ingratiates that person to you. So from my perspective, I knew that the friendship was different sitting at a table for two at the Capitol Hill Club in the basement when the Elvis Presley of our freshman class said, this is a little bit overwhelming.
So Tim, talk about unlikely friendships. What's so important about unlikely friendships?
I think if you look back at the foundation of the friendship, sometimes you look for people who are just like yourself, and those common bonds are easier to establish. The reality of it is, as small as South Carolina is, what you reference is very important. The upstate versus the lowcountry. In South Carolina, we have often joked about the fact that there's at least 3 states within the borders of South Carolina. There's the upstate, the lowcountry, and the Midlands. And the 3 characteristics of those areas are dramatically different. And so for us coming from the 2 extremes of our state to become good friends so quickly was absolutely not seen. And we often joke about the fact that his dad's a doctor, he's a lawyer. I was raised in a single parent household with a very different perspective. So our vantage point on life is sometimes polar opposite, but the thing that binds us together is true desire to know each other beyond the differences, and then to use the knowledge that comes from each other's different perspectives in a way that makes the other person better. So I'm better having understood his perspective and not questioned his intentions. What's powerful about the unlikely friendship is the whole notion of Proverbs 27:17, as iron sharpens iron, so one person does the other. The importance of that is when you're in Washington, if you really want a friend, buy a dog. You don't get friendships in Washington, D.C. And the reality of it is that this friendship that was really born out of pressure, some pain, turned out to be one of the greatest blessings that God has provided me, particularly in Washington, D.C.
So part of our focus is around reconciliation. We could kind of imagine why that's important, but talk about why now, why reconciliation, why us?
Look at where our world is. I mean, whether it's attacks in Brussels from an anti-Semitism perspective, whether it's the polarization of politics in our country, whether it's race relations, religion, denominations, the one thing that seems to be ever present is division and polarization. I believe that the Lord begins at the end and works his way back to where we are. And because of that foresight, I think he established the possibility for a great friendship between the two of us that hopefully will have an impact beyond Congress and hopefully beyond our state. It certainly has had a major impact in my life. I am a better person because the good Lord gave me a friend who could see through the facade, who was patient enough, kind enough, typically, kind enough to ask deep, penetrating questions, and sometimes hold me accountable, because ultimately at the end of the day, a friendship isn't a friendship if there's no conflict, and we've had to work through some conflict before. So often when we come from people from different sides, we question their intentions. No one knows the heart of man. Barely the man where the heart beats in his chest knows that heart.
We've had conflict since Cain and Abel. So conflict isn't new, divisiveness isn't new, division isn't new. What I do think is a little bit different is it's 24 hours a day now, and you see it on television, and it feels different in our country than it did when I was a kid growing up. It may not be different, it just feels like there is both this constant awareness of our differences, of our divisions, and yet there is an omnipresent hunger, yearning for unity. I have always believed that you could put any two people that have never met each other before, and if you wanted to, you would find that you agree on, people of good conscience, you agree on most things in life. So why we have this nature of running towards the division, I just find baffling. I am more interested in what we have in common than I am our differences. There has to be a distinction between conflict and contrast. The conflict is what's debilitating. The conflict is what leads to people retreating to their own camps. And I just really believe that there is a hunger and a yearning in our country for us to focus on the things that we have in common, despite the constant pressure to focus on the things that divide us.
We're talking about big issues, big issues in our country, in our state. So why one-on-one relationships? Talk about how one-on-one relationships may connect to a greater good.
I think overall, it's hard to get in a large group setting and make a lot of progress. In my experience, the larger the group, the less sincere, because you have to have a facade, you have to play the game. If you really want to have a deep, abiding friendship, it can only happen in very small, intimate gatherings. 1, 2, or 3 folks is basically the largest groups that I've been a part of, where the relationship dug deep and not just wide. And so for me, the one relationship at a time is a powerful force for good, because it allows us to go deep and not just go wide. Trey and I are inviting you to join us on a 6-week journey to explore the power of unlikely friendships. Yes, that's right. We are asking you to discover how one-on-one friendships can transform your life and your community. When have you witnessed the power of a friendship to change things for the better? Maybe it was within your family, or among a few close neighbors, or a small group in your church.